Welcome to Real World Peaceful Parenting, a podcast for parents that are tired of yelling, threatening, and punishing their kids. Join mom and master certified parent coach Lisa Smith as she gives you actionable, step-by-step strategies that'll help you transform your household from chaos to cooperation. Let's dive in.
Welcome to today's episode. I am so excited. I feel like I say that every week, but every week I'm so excited. Today I am joined by a special guest named Viv Freeman. Viv is so special to me, I just can't even tell you all. Viv is a member of my membership community called The Hive. And if you'd like to know more about that, we'll link to The Hive in the show notes. Love to have all of you join. So Viv is a member of The Hive. She's a leader within our group. And I've had the pleasure of knowing her for about 1.5 years now and working with her. She's a mom of 4. And we're going to turn the tables today. Viv is going to interview me and ask me some questions that she thinks you all might want to know. So we're going to dig deep and it's going to be fun. I'm excited about this. So I want to start out by welcoming Viv, and I want to invite her to tell us a little bit about herself and her family.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me on. I am honored and humbled that you would ask me to do this. I am the mom to 4 amazing kids, and I am learning daily how to just love them for who they are. And my oldest and youngest are strong-willed, so I've learned so much from you in that area. My oldest is a boy, and he's 11 years old. And then I have a daughter who is 9. I have my son who is 6. And then I have our youngest, who's a boy, and he just turned 3. He's probably more strong-willed than the older one.
So 4 kids, 11 and under.
11 and under.
And 2 full contact sports.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Especially that last one. But I'm learning a lot with the first one. So it was interesting. I found you last year during COVID. It was one of your free master classes. And actually for Mother's Day, my husband said, that will be your gift. You can do Peaceful Parenting 101 as your Mother's Day gift. And I was just thrilled because I knew I wanted to change the way that I was parenting and I didn't know how to do it. And you always say this line of, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And you appeared and I'm ready. And I am just soaking in everything that you've been teaching, since I started. And then now as a Hive member, which I've absolutely loved being a part of that village and just learning and growing. So
great,
you.
Viv. Yeah. So it's been 1 year. So here we are almost in the United States. We're coming upon Mother's Day this coming weekend. So here we are full circle 1 year later. Tell us a little bit. And I do promise to turn the wheel over to you here in a second, but tell us a little bit, if you will, about the transformation that's happened in the last year. What's the biggest thing you've noticed?
Right off the bat, the biggest thing that I've noticed is changing the way that I think. So really looking and observing, my thoughts, and then the way that you have really broken down for me, why my kids act the way that they do and how to respond when they act like that. And especially, dropping the judgment in their behavior. I mean, right there, once I can change the way that I think and understand why things are the way that they are, it makes it so much easier for me to then, make a little tweak, make a little change, do something just a little differently. And then I get a completely different result. And for me, that's really what's been awesome. Just learning those tools and, having a tool belt with all these different, things that you can pull out. But really understanding the thought process behind it, I think that's what's been the most transformational.
It's been so fun to watch, you grow and transform and bring these tools on board, and then, watch your whole family get on board and watch from afar, everybody have the transformation that they've had. I always say it's my soulful currency, to get to go on the ride with families like you. So, and you really have embraced the content. I've seen it, and it's just, you're a real testament to what's possible when you put the effort in. And so I want to say, well done. And I wanted, when I thought about doing this episode, you quickly came to mind as a leader who would really be able to ask good questions and really pull out some useful information out of me for, that mom or that dad or that grandmother or that parent that's listening today and really needs to hear the message. So let's dig in. I'm going to turn it over to you and let's just dive in.
Okay. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is, why do you do this? What is your message or what is your goal, that you're putting out into the world with peaceful parenting?
That's a good question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that before. Why do I do this? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is I'm my own best client, which I say all the time. I've had a massive transformation myself. I was, it's still hard to talk about, but I was a dominant parent. And what I really knew is it wasn't how I wanted to parent. And I knew what I wanted and I didn't know how to get there. And I would lay in bed every morning and say, today's the day I'm not going to yell, like it was a diet. I'm not going to eat carbs and I'm not going to yell. And by 5 o'clock, I was eating carbs and yelling. And now today I eat carbs, but don't yell. So it was really out of a sense of, I want to do something different. And what I knew in my heart of hearts is that I wanted to build a relationship with my son. That I didn't have the words at the time, but what I knew deep inside is that I wanted to build a relationship with Malcolm that transcended his behavior. Because the household I grew up in, love felt very conditional on how I showed up. If I was doing the things I was, quote, supposed to be doing, then there was a different energy than if I wasn't doing the right things or behaving or being a good girl. And that always felt icky to me. And, I didn't have any models, very few role models. I had a couple, but I needed to learn a new way. So I set about to find the solution. And originally, a little known fact is originally when I started my training, I had no intention of actually being a parent coach. I just wanted to learn the material. I was a venture capitalist at the time, and I just wanted to learn the material for my own family. And then, I couldn't stop thinking about it, talking about it, researching it, learning, talking to other people. My poor husband was like, I don't want to hear about this anymore. Maybe you should become a parent coach. And it just sort of, it started from there. And I think the reason I continue it, the reason I'm so passionate about it is that, I want to change the world one family at a time. I want parents to raise a generation of kids. I literally dream of being a part of a movement that raises a generation of kids that feel seen, heard, and valued. The world would look like a different place if the next generation felt seen, heard, and valued by the family of origin.
That's beautiful. I love that, because then the kids learn and grow to be who they're meant to be, and you're supporting them through all of that. And
right. And even when they make mistakes or do something wrong or mess up, to still feel seen, heard, and valued. There's certain tools and techniques and ways to do that. And many of us, we don't know how to do that, right? We weren't raised in that generation, right? And so I admire all of us that show up here to listen to the podcast, that read a book, that do a course, that get coaching, to try to just bring new tools into the home. And that's what I'm here to do is if you're ready, I'll meet you where you're at and provide the tools. That's kind of what gets me out of bed every morning.
So I have this great story to share. It's the one that always pops into my head first when I'm telling people about peaceful parenting. There was this instance with my oldest. He had done something wrong and it was really wrong. And I had caught him in the act of doing it. And I got very upset with him and just had no idea how to move from A to B. There was so much emotion around it. And ironically, I literally had a coaching call with you an hour later. So in my mind, it was just wait until Lisa coaches you through this. Did the coaching call, shared it with you. And then that night was able to go to my son and tell him, I love you no matter what, no matter what you do, no matter, despite, the mess up today, I love all sides of you. And I could literally see in that moment, his whole body just relaxed. And then he started crying and I started crying. And, I always just recall that moment of, having that tool and knowing how to respond to him, and then, working through him with it. So then, once we talked about that part, it was, okay, so how can you make this right? And him being the strong-willed kid that he was, he knew what he wanted to do. He surprised me what he was willing to do. And then he went and he did it. And it was amazing. It turned out so completely different than what it would have been before peaceful parenting.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love that story. And that was a pivotal moment, I'm sure, in your relationship. He looked at you and probably thought, I can trust her and she gets me and I'm not bad, or I just did something wrong, which we all do. I mean, some of us on a daily and hourly basis. I make mistakes all the time. Yeah, it's a beautiful story, Viv. Yeah.
Grew from it, like as a family together. My husband was sitting right there. He's, looking at my son, telling him the same thing. And it was, like you said, a pivotal moment. I mean, it changed our family right there. Just put us on a new trajectory. So
great. Oh, my heart's just beating fast. I can't get enough of those stories. They fill me up.
If that's my pivotal moment, what was your defining moment with Malcolm that really led you to want to find a different way to parent him?
Yeah. I don't think I'll ever forget it. We were standing in his bedroom upstairs in our house in California, and I was yelling at him over something. He wasn't moving fast enough, getting in the shower, coming down to dinner or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. And it really doesn't matter because yelling was a pretty regular thing in our family. And I was yelling at him and he was yelling at me back because he's strong-willed. And I was, teaching him this is what we do in the family. When we're upset, when we're dysregulated, we yell. So I'm yelling at him, he's yelling at me, and then I'm yelling at him for yelling at me. And at the exact same time, I'm wondering who taught him to be this angry. And then like this voice came in the room and said, you, Lisa, look at this. It was like a Christmas carol. I was observing myself while I was parenting. And I was asking the question of who taught him this. And another voice in my head was like, you. And it was I just never forget it. I can tell you what I was wearing, what Malcolm was wearing. And I just, I thought to myself, I don't want to do this because I know where this ends up. I've been the child of a dominant parent and I know where this goes and I don't want this. And, my husband and I were married for 14 years before we had our son. We spent a lot of those years seriously thinking we weren't going to have children at all by decision. And then we decided to have a child. And I felt obligated based on that to do better. I thought to myself, you waited all this time and you consciously made the decision to be a mom. You need to do better than this. You can do better. I didn't know how in the moment, but I just knew that there had to be a better way. And I literally left his bedroom and went in my bedroom and I fell to my knees and I said a prayer. I prayed for a solution, literally, which, I asked for a sign, a solution, a nudge, an answer. And as the world works, a couple weeks later, conscious parenting fell into my lap. And I just knew that this is how I wanted to do it. I didn't know all the details. I just knew there was a better way. And what I really, feel is that I knew right away there was a different way to parent that led to connection and caring more about the relationship than the behavior in the moment. The behavior is important and sometimes it needs to be addressed, but it doesn't need to overpower or usurp the relationship. And I knew I wanted it. I just didn't know how to get it. So then I just had to, and I'm good at research. I'm good at figuring things out. I'm a smart girl. So then I was off to the races. Okay, I know what I want. I just need to figure out how to get there. So I sort of drew the map backwards, and that's when things really took off for me.
The word, it's interesting to me that you chose peaceful, like peaceful parenting, because right off the bat, like that's what drew me in. That's what resonated with me, this concept of being able to parent peacefully. And then, the more that I dug into the course, and experienced the coaching calls, that is really what kind of made it seem like, wow, like I found someone who really resonates with me. And that the way in which you teach finally clicked for me. And I found, just a style of coaching and learning that really felt like I'd finally found the way that I could learn to parent peacefully the way that I had wanted to. And I laugh now because so many times, I'll hear your voice in my head, when certain behaviors pop up, or, my husband will say, well, what would Lisa say about this? And it's like, oh.
I love that. I love that. And I right away I came up with the name, The Peaceful Parent. And part of it is exactly what you said. I wanted peaceful to be in the name. I wanted people to understand where we were going, which doesn't always mean calm or quiet or compliant, right? And the other interesting, important thing is it's the peaceful parent, not the peaceful kid, right? Because our job is to stay peaceful even while our kids aren't. And that's the ultimate goal. And that's what I think I really help parents work towards is, I say, if you can go to bed on your kid's worst day, like they've struggled, it's been a rough day, they've stormed, they've been upset, things haven't gone their way, and you can feel like you stayed peaceful, i.e. regulated, that is the most amazing feeling ever, right? It's easy to be peaceful on your kid's best day.
Sure.
Right? But when they've had a rough day, and just nothing's gone well for them, and you can stay peaceful, that's like Christmas, Hanukkah, and your birthday all rolled into one, The other funny thing about the name, The Peaceful Parent, is it's also, if I'm honest, a little tongue in cheek because, I'm loud and I've got a lot of energy and I have a big voice and it's very loud and I can fill a room on my own. I've spoken to thousands of people before without a microphone. And, I've always just been someone that kind of, I just has a big presence. And so high volume, lots of energy. And so the peaceful was a little bit tongue in cheek that way too, because I think I do peaceful different than, what people might envision. And I sort of like that juxtaposition. And I like meeting people where they're at in however it shows up for them.
I recently heard a definition of peaceful that has just stuck with me. And the definition was peace is simply the presence of something that is good, despite chaos or, your own suffering around you. And like you remind me every time when we do our coaching, like there's so much good in my kids. And, I might not be focused on that, but if I were to focus on that, to go underneath the behavior and really focus on who they are and on our relationship, all that other stuff gets figured out and taken care of. And then that connection, that you've taught us, it's just, fills the heart to overflowing kind of thing.
The presence of something good. That is so good. Like, I'm totally going to run with that. That's it right there. That's peaceful parenting. Yeah. Finding the good in you, finding the good in your kids, finding the good in the relationship, right? That's it.
Absolutely. So can you, I keep mentioning a little bit, but the coaching, can you expand a little bit and maybe explain, what other people might expect, if they come and work with you?
Great question, Viv. I'd like to think, and I have lots of evidence of this, that the number one thing people are going to find when they come to work with me or step into the community is no judgment. I really meet parents where they're at. There's nothing someone's going to tell me that I'm going to judge them or make them feel bad. My goal is to meet people where they're at so they can grow in their journey, in their peaceful parenting transformation. And I really try to help parents take baby steps on the path to understanding what's really going on, to, as I call it, scuba dive down to the feelings and needs. So many of us parents are focusing on the behaviors, that we're spending all of our conversation, our time, our energy, our parenting, our punishing, our thinking, our focus, our complaining on the behavior. And I call that snorkeling right at the surface. And what I really think I do is I help parents understand where the behavior comes from, and which is from feelings and needs. We've talked about that in prior episodes. And what I think I really do is help you scuba dive down to the feelings and needs for not only your children, but yourself. Because if we're focusing on the feelings and needs, the behavior will take care of itself. I was just talking with a client about this today, who's really focused on the behavior. And we had a great conversation about scuba diving down and, really taking care of and it isn't to say we can meet every one of our kids' needs, right? We're not always going to be able to meet their needs. And I'm always clear with this. I'm not talking about ice cream for breakfast or unlimited gaming or staying on Snapchat for 17 hours. Those are wants. I'm talking about core basic needs, right? Attention, affection, appreciation, acceptance, autonomy, and connection. And when we're understanding the behavior is driven from a lack of needs that create feelings, that's the sweet spot of connection for our kids. And that's really what I teach. And said another way, if you work on connection and communication, cooperation will follow.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that line.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I loved your podcast recently where you talked about being moving away from being the critic to the coach, because I feel like that's where I kind of default to. I immediately, in my mind at least, criticize, the way my kids are behaving or acting and not knowing how to move from critic to coach. And so, you showing the way and leading the way and giving tools of how do you move from one to the other.
Yeah.
So what would you say would be like the key in your parenting method?
I think the key is twofold. The first one is, might surprise some people, but number one is learning how to stay regulated as parents, right? That is our number one tool we have. Learning how to stay in our higher brain, stay away from storming alongside our children. And if we can learn to stay regulated, we can show up peacefully. We can also model that for our kids, and we can create connection. So I think a lot of people come to this work thinking it's all about their kids, right? And then at some point they say, I think what we're really doing here is working on me. And I go, really? Okay. Right? Not lost on me. Yeah. And sometimes we have to dig a few layers down to get there. But I think it's really learning our own self-regulation and then, and only then, learning connection with our kids. They really, really, really want connection, which is they feel seen, heard, and valued, right?
Right.
And it's that combination. Connection without regulation isn't going to work, and regulation without connection isn't going to work. So it's a partnership. I'm going to do my part for me. I'm going to work on learning how to stay regulated. It takes practice, right? Absolutely. It takes some tools and it takes practice. And none of us are perfect. I get dysregulated every now and then, right? It's in our community, we say progress over perfection. So it takes work on ourselves to stay regulated, even at the end of a long day at work, or, being with 4 kids on a snow day, or, having a trip somewhere canceled, or the kids being bored. It takes work to stay regulated. And then it also takes a set of tools and practice connecting with your kids.
Absolutely. You always share that, it takes just one peaceful leader in the household to make that transformation. Because of course, along the journey, along the way, I've messed up. And then, my husband might say, well, what Lisa says isn't working. I'm always like, no. I'm just not that great at it yet. Give me a chance, and he's slowly, coming along too. Yeah, just it's a journey, to learn how to stay regulated. And the more you do it, the better it gets.
Yeah. And there's steps forwards and step backwards because our kids are growing and they're going into new stages. And sometimes we get surprised or we get worn down or our self-care gets low or things don't go as planned or, there's an interruption. I think you had a situation recently where there was a unplanned interruption that threw the day off and, you did a great job of staying regulated through that. So yeah, we are human and we are having, relationships with other humans. And so there's no perfection here. Nobody stays regulated all the time. Right. And, it's also a skill to know how to recover from that, which is a large part of what we focus on. And before we go on to the next question, I want to just comment on something you said, Viv, because I think it's a great point. And I would love for, I'd love for everyone listening to hear this. It really does only take one person, one parent in the household to bring this work into the home. Very, very, very rarely do I work with both parents, whether it's, in my one-on-one work or my group coaching or in the membership. And you can have a massive transformation, even if, and I just want everybody to hear this, you can have a massive transformation, even if your partner's not on board. They parent in a completely different way, permissively or dominant. You can have a massive transformation if you're a single parent. At any age, I've worked with parents of adult children that have had massive transformations into peaceful parenting. You can have a transformation if you co-parent with, in a less than optimal situation, an angry person, a narcissist, an absentee, someone who gives in all the time. You can create a transformation with your kids, without the other person being on board. And a lot of people don't know that or believe that's possible, but I know it to be true now after having worked with thousands of clients around the world. And I think you've experienced it too. Yeah.
Yeah. I always laugh because I loved when your podcast came out. And so I kind of suggested to my husband, hey, Lisa's got the podcast. Like you could listen too. It just takes, 15, 20 minutes. And he's like, yeah. I'll get to it. But nothing. And then I was listening to your podcast on a Wednesday, driving home. I opened the door to unload groceries and I had just heard your voice in the car. And then suddenly I heard your voice in the house and it was my husband listening to the podcast. And I was like, oh, he's listening. This is so great.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And he's come on board slowly, reluctantly at first, and then slowly and often looks to you to kind of advise the family on how to do XYZ peacefully, right? So you're the peaceful leader in the household.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He's like your understudy.
Well, I've also noticed with him, they hear things differently. So him listening to the podcast versus me telling him about it, what he's going to hear from you and the way he's going to interpret it is just going to be differently from me. So I've tried to just remain patient and let him learn at his speed and his way, because he's going to pick up on different things.
I love that. It's great. Yeah.
So I have a funny question for you.
Okay.
Do you think you're a good mom?
Oh, well, that's an easy answer. And it may surprise people. I don't think I'm a good mom, and I don't think I'm a bad mom. I think I'm Malcolm's mom. And I really work to stay away from moral or, good and bad, plus and minus descriptors, because some days, I'm clicking on all cylinders and I have my rough days just like anybody else. And Malcolm is his own soul who's come to earth to have his own experience. And I don't get overly invested in the accomplishments or in how he presents to the world when everything's going well. And I don't get overly invested in how he presents to the world when he's made a mistake or things aren't going well. And the beauty of this is I work to keep my ego off the table or out of the, scenario so that I can stay regulated.
Wow.
As his mom. When one tends to assign themselves, the title of I'm a good mom or I'm a bad mom or I'm a crap mom or I'm an excellent mom, then it's much easier to be triggered by an event or an action that challenges that title.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't have a need to assign a title of good or bad. I rather say that I am Malcolm's mom. You are the Freeman children's mom. Right. And some days I do really well. And I knock the ball out of the park, and some days I bunt the ball and we don't even make it to first base. But I do really think of myself as just Malcolm's mom. And I should probably also add, and I say this all the time to parents, for me personally, the goal is not to compare myself to anybody else or to expect perfection. My goal every day is to be a better mom than I was yesterday. Right. And if I'm just 1% better every day and we add that up over a lifetime, I'm going to do okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, sometimes that 1% to get better takes support and help and work, like showing up here every week and listening to the podcast, or, getting a coach, or asking for resources, or joining a course like my Peaceful Parenting 101, or coming and being in community like in the Hive. And so for everyone who's doing that, who's doing whatever it takes to be 1% better, I salute you.
I love how you say Malcolm's mom, because it makes me think of, each of my kids, the connection with each of them is so different. It's not just this one title of mom. I've really been trying to figure out how to connect with my daughter. And again, after one of your coaching calls, it was, hey, get a journal and have, something that goes back and forth between you. And you started it off with, say positive things and just encourage her in the beginning, and then let the journal just evolve into what it is. And I did it totally thinking she's just going to leave it to collect dust on the shelf. And about 2 days later, the journal appeared on my pillow, and she had shared, she doesn't like answering questions. So it's really hard when she has a bad day. I can't quite get, what happened in that day. So she put it in the journal, and I was able to write to her, and we just kept it going, just writing back and forth. And it felt like, wow, I finally figured out how to connect with her as her mom.
Yeah.
And that just felt amazing to finally find that. It's like a key, and you finally unlock the lock.
And you found the key because let me just share this because I think it'll be helpful. So let's just fill in the blanks here. So Viv's oldest child has a lot of words and likes to share them and has a lot to say.
Yes.
And then your daughter doesn't have a lot to say. She thinks a lot, obviously, but she isn't super verbal
or expressive.
And she was probably feeling pressure from you and the son, like, how was your day? What went wrong? What's going on? And I think you were a little frustrated that you couldn't get her to open up. And so what you did a great job of, the key here, to go back to something we talked about earlier, is instead of focusing on the behavior, you scuba dive down to the feelings and needs. What is she needing? And what we talked about in the coaching call was an alternative way to communicate to you. Yeah. And I suggested the journal, and, you gave it a shot. You had no idea if it was going to work or not. You gave it a go. And, there was like this, I'm imagining this, because you're the mom and she's the only daughter in the family. There's this fun little journal passing back and forth. You leave it on her pillow. Now she leaves it on yours. And there's this key to her kingdom of communicating with her. But it's really because you took the time to scuba dive down. And, it didn't take that much time, but you were awake at the wheel, and you scuba dive down to what is she needing, instead of feeling like she won't communicate, instead of getting caught in the behavior. Okay, this isn't working. What will work? And you found it. And it's just a beautiful example of the work we do inside the community. And it's really, you met her where she was at. That's what I want to say. You met her, all four of your children are unique, and you're working hard to meet each one of them where they're at. And that's also your four children, because of that, are going to feel incredibly connected, right? Because she feels seen, heard, and valued, because her communication style is different than Big Brother. And you're happy to show up for each of them in the style they need.
I just needed some help getting there.
And that's what I'm here for.
It took me a long time with her to figure it out.
That's what I'm here for. And anyone listening can have that too. I mean, that's what this work is. Mm-hmm. It doesn't require a lot of time. It just requires showing up and trying the tools.
Absolutely. It's little steps. It's little tweaks, little things that you teach along the way, that just those little tweaks just totally changes the result after you use them. Can you think of any big aha moments that you've had in parenting your strong-willed / full contact sport of a son?
Oh gosh, you got all night. I mean, we could go forever. Malcolm is one of my greatest teachers. And I think one of the things that I've learned from him in 16 years of being his mom is that we can have big emotions in this house. We can have storming. We can have conflict. And at the exact same time, feel tons of love. Mm. And that blew my mind. And it required me to bring some tools into the family. It requires me to stay regulated. But I grew up in a household where conflict was looked at as one-sided and not productive. And there was either conflict or love, but rarely could there be both going on at the same time. And I remember one day I read a quote. I don't remember who said it, but the quote is that conflict is growth trying to happen. Mm. And I was like, what? And so I knew that quote, and I had that kind of spinning around in my mind, and conceptually I understood it. And then one day Malcolm and I were riding in the car together, and I was saying to him, Malcolm, this was sort of, I would say, halfway through my peaceful parenting journey. And I was telling him that people don't like conflict, and that, this thing that we're doing, going back and forth, people don't like it. It's not productive. And he looked over at me and he said, Mom, this is one of the areas where you're wrong. And I was like, really? Tell me more. Tell me how I was like, oh, I totally want to hear this. How and where am I wrong about this? And he's like, Dad and we don't mind conflict at all. In fact, conflict helps us get to the other side and resolve things. You're the one that doesn't like conflict in our family. And I was like, and I had this moment that, he feels very safe and secure in our family because we value the relationship. And so he can storm and speak his mind and have an opinion and disagree and have his big emotions while feeling completely loved. And it was an absolute game changer for me. I was not the same person after that conversation as I was forever changed in a good way. And I think that, I've learned that I think it comes back to valuing the relationship over the behavior.
Right.
I don't love you more when you show me good behavior. I love you the exact same. Now, sometimes we have to talk about things, meltdowns, mistakes, fighting, unmet needs. Sometimes we have to talk about the behavior and the feelings and needs, but it never changes my love for you. And to me, unconditional love is when we make sure our kids know that all the time.
Mm-hmm. After that podcast where you were interviewing Malcolm, I asked my oldest and I said, what do you like about the way that I parent? Or what do you like about the way that Dad parents? And he said the same for both of us. He says, you listen. like, I know that I can come to you and tell you, and that you're going to listen and hear me out. And that was just like, oh, I'm so glad that I am investing so much in learning how to listen to him and how to just grow with him.
Is there a better compliment as a parent? You know what I mean? I remember, when Malcolm was probably about 9 or 10, one day, very matter-of-factly, he said, to me, "Mom, you get me." And I think it's the penultimate compliment from a child to a parent. You get me. Yeah. It's the essence of peaceful parenting, because what the child is saying is, I feel seen, heard, and valued.
Yeah. When you said that, you shared that story, that you get him. I just was thinking in my mind, that's what I want. How do I get there?
Everybody can have that. And everybody listening to this podcast, you can have it no matter where you're starting from, no matter how old your kids are, no matter how many kids you have, no matter what your co-parenting situation is or isn't. Maybe this is a good place to end on. You can have that. You just have to do some work, find some resources, dig in, take the next step, show up here every week and listen to the podcast, join, my course, join the community, take the next step. And, it does not take nearly the time. We're not talking about going back to college and coming home from a full day of work and studying for 4 or 5 hours a night. I mean, in some instances, transformation can happen with as little as an hour a week. Right, Viv?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. It just weaves into your life, just listening to the podcast while I'm driving and dropping the kids off at school. And,
right.
And then you hear something that kind of clicks for you, and then you just start using it and you're like, oh, it worked.
Right. or joining the Hive and coming to a call and listening to someone else get coached where I share a tool, and then you take that tool back to your family. The beauty here is what you're learning, you're going to practice on the natural time you spend with your kids. And success breeds success, right? So you learn one tool, you take it, you incorporate it, and, things get a little better. And then you come back and learn the next tool. And then,
right.
If you need course correct, we need to course correct, or we need to coach it through, we do that. And so it builds upon itself with, not a lot of hours having to be invested.
It's smart work, not hard work.
There we go. Smart work, not hard work. I love that. I love that. All righty. Well, I enjoyed this. I hope you did too. And I hope everybody listening got a ton out of it. Anything else you want to comment on or ask me as we wrap up?
No, I don't have anything else to share, but thank you so much for having me on and just being able to talk with you and go back and forth and hear bits of your story. I love when we get to hear, the bits of the story of how you started and where you're heading. And I just want to join you on that journey.
Well, there's
parenting.
Yes, you've got a front row seat, and anyone else listening that wants to join us, we are an incredibly inclusive community who, is here to help your child feel seen, heard, and valued. So go to my website, thepeacefulparent.com. I've got a course there that you can take to get started on your path, and then you can take it from there. Viv, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with all of us. And it has been, my life is better having you in it. So I feel honored to know you and your family. And thank you again.
Well, my family absolutely loves you. And it's so much better with having you in our family. So thank you.
That's fabulous. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here and listening. Until we meet again, I'm wishing you peaceful parenting. Take care. Thank you so much for listening today. I want to personally invite you to head over to thepeacefulparent.com/welcome and sign up for my free Peaceful Parenting mini course. You'll find everything you need to get started on the path to peaceful parenting just waiting for you over there at www.thepeacefulparent.com/welcome. Can't wait for you to get started.
Thanks for listening to Real World Peaceful Parenting. If you want more info on how you can transform your parenting, visit thepeacefulparent.com. See you soon.